There are laws that tell us what we must do. And then there are manners, the guidelines for how we choose to behave when no one is forcing our hand. Most of life doesn't happen in a courtroom. It happens in conversations, disagreements, moments of pressure, and decisions where the question isn't, is this legal, but rather, is this right? Today's guest has lived on both sides of that line. Eric Faddis, the Mile High Lion, is a former prosecutor and the founding attorney of the law offices of Eric Faddis, a modern Denver firm built on integrity, innovation, and outcomes. He's secured millions for injured victims, but more importantly, he spent years watching human behavior under a microscope when the stakes are high and character is fully exposed. In this episode of Mannered, we explore what happens where the law ends and manners begin. The unwritten rules, the moments that aren't governed by statutes, but by courtesy, restraint, honesty, and respect. We'll talk about justice, power, professionalism, and the simple truth that being legally right doesn't always mean being decent. Because manners aren't about rules, they're about responsibility. Eric, welcome to Mannered.
Yeah, Sean, stoked to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here, Eric. As before the call, we're kind of chatting a little bit, but you are a guy that not only knows the law very well, and I've seen you in action, and you present this amazing strength and commitment to your clients, but you're also just a genuinely good guy. So that's why you're here on Mannered is, because that really represents what this show is about is, working between the lines of beyond legal, having that element of manners. And I think, to get us started, as you are this, cutting edge man of the law, but you're also this incredibly kind and genuine person. Can you tell us a little bit about you professionally and personally to give our audience an understanding of who Eric Faddis, the Mile High Lion, is?
Yeah, I mean, Sean, thanks for the generous intro there. The feelings are certainly mutual. Yeah, as for me, I grew up in Colorado native, went to Catholic school, and, for all of its shortcomings, I think it did impart some important lessons and values and things like that. I went to CSU undergrad, DU law school. During those times, I was reading a lot of philosophy, and that talks about how we deal with one another, how we should treat one another, how we should treat ourselves, and I think that those things are critical. I opened up a law firm in 2018, and then most recently the newest iteration is the law office of Eric Faddis. We opened up in December 2025, rocking and rolling. And then I do a good amount of legal and political commentary on TV. I've done, yeah, not to sound like a jerk, but like 600 media appearances on Fox News and Nancy Grace and News Nation, stuff like that. So, but yeah, manners are just kind of something that's central to my heart, and I think it's not talked about enough. So I'm super jazzed to be here to discuss it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head with one of the things that brought you here is you more so than most people have really, you get to see people, and I hate to say this, but you get to see them at their worst. So, sometimes that is really the best reflection we can have as individuals of who we really are in our worst moments. And, somebody that is in that environment, whether it be in that courtroom or dealing with someone that's gone, through a painful injury and things of that nature, you know, tell me a little bit about, that human nature component that plays a role in what you do.
Oh gosh, it's just vital. So I do personal injury work. So if someone's hurt and it's the fault of another person, the injured individual comes to me for representation. I also do some criminal defense. And so, I mean, Sean, like you said, like sometimes they're coming to me on the worst day of their life or like one of the worst days of their life. And that can be challenging for them. It can be challenging for me at times. But I think, maintaining that sense of humanity, a sense of empathy and understanding that this might not be the best version of this person that's ever existed, but they they need help, and they deserve kindness and dignity. And those are things we really try to emphasize in our practice.
Absolutely. I think a lot of us, average Joes out there get our view of the legal process and lawyers and attorneys through movies and TV shows. It's, next to like cop shows, it's legal shows are at the top of the list. And so I think there's a lot of perceptions out there of what we think the courtroom is like and what it actually is. And I've had, I don't know if I want to call it a luxury, but I actually went to the Denver courthouse into the, I think it was the third floor, the like major, crime stuff. And I was expecting to see some of that, true drama play out. And I was kind of blown away at how nice everyone was. Just the prosecutors and the defense attorneys, I was kind of blown away. Can you take us into that world a little bit? Take us into the courtroom and, there's obviously, you know, we're dealing with criminals in some cases, but there, as you said, there's still compassion there. Tell me a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, I mean, as a general principle, you get more flies with honey than with vinegar. If you are posturing towards an outcome, you want something out of the case. You can be a huge douchebag to everybody, and that might work on some folks, but on the balance, that's probably not going to result in the outcome you want. And in that courtroom, especially in a jury trial, you're uh you want to connect with these jurors. You want them to feel you. You want to feel them. You want to reach inside their chest cavity and touch their heart. And I don't think you can do that solely by being a dick. I think you got to recognize, the full spectrum of humanity, all of the considerations, good and bad, that go into a case, and convey that to a jury. And on top of that, if you're a huge jerk, they're probably not going to trust you. They're probably not going to like you. And so, what does that mean for your client? There are these considerations that are front of mind.
Yeah, yeah. Don't you think that's kind of representative of life itself? There's so many times out there where we get a lot more if we just even if someone is wrong, but it's sometimes just it's not worth it to go there with them. It's just to keep it straight and narrow, and once again have that sense of manners and etiquette to help life kind of flow naturally. Is this something that you went a little bit into the backstory, but have you always been somebody that has just been in raised right, or have great manners, or has it been something that you've kind of worked on throughout the years?
Well, I got to give a huge shout out to my parents, Jim and Holly Faddis, that they did an extraordinary job, in my opinion. Not necessarily in the outcome, but just in their practice of parenting. Uh, you know, um, for me, like I said, in college and law school, I got really into philosophy. So I'm reading Kant and Sartre and Marcus Aurelius. And Marcus Aurelius is a famous Stoic. He existed around like 150 AD. And one thing that he talks about is it's sort of an exalted state if you can be kind to someone who's being unkind to you. One thing it does is it recognizes their humanity. It also ensures that you're not, rolling around in the mud, in terms of your own principles. And so I think maintaining those personal principles, and having your actions be in conformity with those are really important. And so I try to have that mindset when I'm in the courtroom, when I'm out of the courtroom, and it's just something that I really value. I've gotten so many great outcomes by trying to do the right thing. Like, that's even if it's not necessarily what might be most legally expedient or whatever. Sometimes trying to do the right thing prevails over everything, and that's been my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you have multiple angles of the law that you've worked in and worked on. I mean, from being a prosecutor to you've yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but also a defense attorney, correct? And
Correct. Yeah.
and personal injury attorney. What? What are some things that in cases where, I'm sure you get cases where you probably wish you could go back in time and be like, I wish this would have happened. I wish this is how we acted in this circumstance. It would have made the job easier here. What's some advice? And let's maybe start with on the personal injury side of things. What's some advice on if someone is wronged or, in a traffic accident, whatever that might be, what are some things that maybe we can do outside of the law realm, but in that kind of etiquette manners realm that might help us have a better outcome?
Oh gosh, I mean, if a person's injured in a car accident or something like that, and there's a lawsuit filed, and I'm representing that person, how they present in their deposition, which is where they're asked questions under oath from the other side, it can get pretty testy in there, can get kind of heated sometimes.
Yeah.
But the way that they present and just interact with a person who's essentially their opponent can be so critical because in those interactions, they're looking at, hey, how's this person going to present in front of a jury? Are they likable? Do they seem like a nice guy or gal? And that goes a long way. So, like, for example, if your client's being peppered with questions from the other side, they're breathing down your client's neck, and your client is maintaining their composure, they're being them, and they're not giving up ground, they're not making unnecessary concessions, but they're also not taking jabs, and they're not jousting with these individuals who have their swords drawn. I think there's kind of a nobility in terms of the impression that can be made, and so that's an instance where doing the right thing is also going to most likely to get you the best outcome.
Yeah, I could absolutely see that. And, it personally speaking, I know I have a tough time in life, it- trusting that process sometimes because, just like anybody else, I let my emotions get a hold of me. And, and I've learned in life that I'm best to trust the experts like you. And, when I'm sure that, the process for you is, trust you in that protector and that person that's out for their best interest. And you kind of handle as much of that as possible to where they can let their emotions, go by the wayside a little bit and you kind of, steer and control. Is that kind of how it's looked at generally?
Oh gosh, yeah, and when it comes to that emotionality piece, one thing that I tell clients is, hey, we don't want to turn that off. We don't want you to be like some sterile zombie who's not a human. In fact, sometimes that emotionality can be utilized to improve their case, and so I think it's sort of harnessing it. It's expressing it in a way that is still consistent with respect and civility and these important values, but they don't got to be a robot in there. And so I think where I come in is to try to channel all of that in a way that is in the best interest of the client, that's in the best interest of justice, and hopefully in the best interest of our community and society more generally.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's a perfect segue into my next question as far as making that, that utopian society of sorts is, are there any things, and one of the things I wanted to get into is that kind of gray area in between what is technically legal, but maybe not right, and in a lot of cases, there are so many things that they meet the requirement of being legal, but still society judges as like, I don't like that, and so, what just playfully speaking, are there any things in that gray area that you wish were actually a law to do, as far as the things that may be out there that rub us raw on an etiquette side of things?
Well, gosh, I mean, I think uh, do unto others as you would have done unto you is a really good golden principle by
Absolutely.
which everyone can conform their behavior. When I was a prosecutor, Sean, I was there for several years, and I got to the point where the law said, hey, if a person is driving on a revoked license, they could be put in a box for 30 days. And, I got kind of disenchanted with that sort of an approach. I'd go to my supervisor and I would say, hey, look, like, this guy was driving without a license. He's experiencing financial distress. He's unemployed. He's having trouble getting to the DMV. Is there something else we could do besides just throwing this dude in a box? And I think, that was sort of a conflict between what might be legally appropriate, but contrasting with what might be the right thing to do. And so ultimately, those were some big reasons why I left the prosecutor's office.
Yeah. Wow. You just opened Pandora's box there with that one. So I think that's absolutely how to look at this is there are a lot of things, with the law. And once again, I am not an attorney, nor do I play one on TV, but I know enough to know that, the law is very specific, and it's very also circumstantial in a lot of cases where it's like, do this for this. And that's why we have judges and Supreme Courts and lawyers and attorneys to help navigate that law and its fluidity in based on the circumstance. And so, you bring up a great point of where I have heard, and I've personally experienced elements where technically maybe it was illegal, but the outcome based on what the law says isn't technically right. Based on the certain because it's a slippery slope. You once again you take someone's license away for 30 days, or it could cost them their entire job, which ultimately cost them their livelihood, which ultimately cost them their family and their marriage, and that this big snowball starts rolling over expired parking tickets or whatever it might be, so take us on a further deeper dive with that a little bit and how you weigh those things.
Yeah, one example that comes to mind too in my criminal defense work, sometimes I represent folks who are accused, and sometimes they're accused of some egregious stuff, and sometimes they've done it, and sometimes they have. And so if I'm in that courtroom and there's an alleged victim on the stand, my job is to try and scrutinize their testimony in front of a jury. So cross-examine them, pick out weaknesses, things like that. Now, the law says that I could go in there and just tear them a new one. And that's one approach. But the way that I think about it oftentimes is, hey, this person didn't ask to be here. Whether they're being 100% accurate about what they're alleging, that's one thing. But this is probably distressing for this person. And I think I need to recognize their dignity and their humanity in the way that I'm asking my questions and interacting with them. Because the jury is going to be looking at that and they're going to say, gosh, this, if you go too harsh and you're not concerned with manners or politeness or respect, that's going to come off horrible. And so even if I undermine their credibility with a scorched earth type cross
Yeah.
examination, I might be losing points for my own client doing that. And also
Wow.
it just might not be the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. So there really is kind of that manners does play a role in the courtroom beyond the law. So, that's one of the
Oh
things I
yeah.
really wanted to get to is, does it matter? Because, you're the same as me on the movies and TV shows. You see these ruthless, just like, these fists slamming the table and this is how it is. And, it's just, it doesn't make sense because you're absolutely right with the others involved in that courtroom. That's gonna have an effect on that outcome for the person you're fighting for sometimes. So I could absolutely
Oh
see
yeah.
where that balance comes into play. What as far as that balance does go, how do you is there a line? Do you know where the line is? How do you carry strength but also kindness?
Yeah. I think on a fundamental level, these are all human beings. And especially on the civil side, the personal injury stuff, we're not talking about someone who maliciously killed another person. We're not talking about these morally blameworthy actions in the same way that we might discuss them in the criminal sphere. And so, but the fundamental principle, these are all humans. They should be treated as such, even your opponents, even your adversaries. I think that's really important. Now, it's still appropriate to identify identify weaknesses, to identify discrepancies and inconsistencies, and show them to the jury in an assertive way. And I think if you do that without going overboard, you as an attorney gain even more credibility with
Yep.
that jury. If you overplay your hand, if you're engaging in histrionics in that courtroom, you might be seen as a fool, as a joke, or as an asshole. And I never want to be seen that way in front of a jury or in front of anybody. And so I need to make sure I'm mindful of that when I'm trying to toe that line.
Absolutely. And I think you do a very good job at that. Obviously, I haven't been in every one of your court appearances or anything like that, but I just in the way that you carry yourself. And one of the things that I notice about you in kind of that contrast, and once again, not pointing the finger at any other attorney in the area, but one thing that really stands out about you, throughout your history is you kind of have that. You're a modern guy. I really see you doing things kind of almost futuristic when it comes to how you go about it all. It's not your standard billboards that you see along the highway. It's not your standard social post. You operate and carry yourself in a different way. Is that something that comes naturally to you, or is that tell me a little bit about that approach.
Yeah, I've always valued um, sort of going against the grain, doing things that are disruptive, doing things that sort of transcend the traditional molds. And I don't know how successful I am, but I certainly try to do things like that. And I think that in this idea of manners and respect and values, that's an evolving concept. That those things evolve with new understandings, with new science, with new social norms. And so I try to kind of maybe play both sides in the sense that I think there are these core principles, there are these core values, respect, kindness, decency. Those things are always cool, man. But then if you can, there's nothing wrong with shaking things up either. There's nothing wrong with making a splash.
Yeah.
And I think that folks can do that in a way that still prioritizes manners and respect, but also success and differentiation.
Yeah. Yeah. You're so right. What out there as far as movies and TV shows you've watched, are there any that get it close or get it right?
Oh man, I gotta tell you, Sean, I'm so saturated with legal stuff at work that I'm not huge on watching it at home. I do these true crime television appearances and what have you, and then when I go home, it's Real Housewives or something, which is like just like the opposite of manners, in fact. Um, but I think some of the true crime stuff that is not fictionalized, I think that shows a more accurate glimpse into what the folks are like who actually do this work on a day-to-day basis. And I think when you watch those kinds of shows, like true crime docuseries, things like that, you get a sense as to the humanity that comes out from both sides. Even a person accused of some ungodly thing, or
Hmm.
even some grizzled police officer who might be overstepping his bounds, there are still ways to sort of see through that and grasp the humanity of those folks. So I think it comes through more in the true crime documentary side than in the fictionalized movie side.
That's a great point, and I love that you see the world that way. I wish more people did kind of see the human behind everything. I've seen in my own life, I've seen what most people would think are the worst, and I've seen what most people would think are the best, and I can tell you it's never the case either way. It's there's always just this human at the end of the day. Obviously some make some horrible mistakes and things like that, but most of the time there is this Grinch style little beating heart, that that is there. So I do love that you see the world that way, because I think if we all did a better job of seeing the world that way, it might go a little smoother out there. But you know, taking that a little further, do you find I'm a marketing and advertising guy everywhere I go. So are you an attorney everywhere you go?
Um, I sure as heck hope not, or else I'm going to be single for a long time, I think. But I think that part is ingrained in me, and sort of, like I said, in Catholic school and in getting into philosophy and stuff like that, these ideas of justice, these ideas of doing the right thing, those do kind of pervade, or at least I really try as best I can to have those front of mind when I'm in any interaction. What's fair? What's a fair way to treat this person? How should I be talking to this person? Would it be the right thing to do, Eric, to get nasty and gross and try to humiliate someone? Or instead, are there sort of these guiding values that I try to adhere to? Certainly not perfect. I'm sure I fall short oftentimes, um, but I sort of have that same mindset whether I have my lawyer hat on or not.
Yeah, that makes perfect. I can tell you, if I was a lawyer, Lord, watch out, because I would throw around that weight wherever I go. In a not really, but I have actually tried to. In the very first episode I did of this podcast, I told a story about an incident at a restaurant where I finally had to. I called, and this is probably like incriminating myself here, but I called and tried to act like I was an attorney. I'd be like, "This is an attorney," and I was using that's my attorney voice. Is that I was like, I don't know why I can't just have my normal voice as an attorney, but yeah, I would find that with your knowledge of the law and how that all works, I feel like it would be hard to shut that off out there, and once again, do you ever find yourself in these, you know, social environments or, out and about where you want to object in real life or like,
Yeah, all the time, man. I want to, you know, uh, if someone's just, talking mess and doesn't really have a factual support for what they're saying, or say objection foundation. This person doesn't have personal knowledge of this. They don't have the appropriate foundation to assert this as a fact.
yeah.
But I think I'd get some pretty weird looks if I tried to do that.
As being an attorney, has that ever helped you out of a real life personal situation?
Oh, sure. Yeah, all the time. I mean, one thing that I think attorneys do is you kind of can critically analyze the situation. You can identify strengths and weaknesses, and then you can sort of weigh those strengths and weaknesses to develop an informed position. And so, like when I'm hearing stuff on the news or what, hearing a politician or something like that, I try to kind of assess from an attorney lens, like, hey, is this something I can place faith in what they're saying, or instead, do they not know what they're talking about, or did they get this info from someone else and that person's not here and we can't really assess that person's credibility? These are all considerations that come up during testimony in the courtroom, but they also come up just in everyday interactions.
Yeah, I could see that. Once again, going back to, me being a, marketing and advertising guy in the broadcast business, I fantasize about certain campaigns in history that I was like, man, I wish I could have been a part of that. I wish I could have, had this idea for that brand or whatever it might be. Do you have those kind of fantasies for cases in history? And if so, is there a specific case that you wish you could have been the attorney on sometime in history?
Sure, good question. Let me think.
Put you on the spot with
So,
this.
I think that one thing that stands out, I don't know if I'd want to do this, but during our country's founding, there was a violent skirmish between British soldiers and Americans at that time. And the British soldiers were charged. And former President John Adams, before he was president, he represented those soldiers, not because he agreed with their cause, not because he agreed with their alleged actions, but because he agreed with them having the fundamental rights to a fair trial and to have their voices be heard and to provide a defense to whatever the government was accusing them of. that would be a very difficult representation, but I
Yeah.
think it serves the structural integrity of our democratic system to represent folks who might seem unpopular, who might be accused of horrible things, because it's less about the client in that scenario and more up to me about serving the Constitution and the principles that are required for our system to function. So those sort of controversial um, cases really attract me. Recently I represented a gentleman named David Lesh. He's like this influencer and kind of environmental provocateur, and he's made a lot of enemies. He's also probably the smartest client I've ever had. He's brilliant.
Really.
But representing him against the federal government was really meaningful because everybody looked at him. There were all these articles about him and posts online, and people were writing into the judge. And I said, hey, wait a sec. This guy deserves a fair trial too. And there are all these glaring weaknesses, evidentiary speaking. And so that was my role in that case. And I really like that one.
Yeah, that's incredible. All of that. I mean, I really love the history. I'm going to look back into that because I like that element. I mean, that would make once again everyone's gonna be like, "Well, this guy's addicted to movies," but that sounds like a good movie with John Adams. But no, that's incredible. The other thing I think about is, you know, my family and I love to play this game Balderdash. Have you ever played that?
I've heard of it. I haven't played it.
It's like this. You'll get like a strange word, or you'll get this weird law, and you have to basically like you'll write like you try and trick others into what the actual law is or something like that, or the definition of a word. So it'll be like quambaludi, and it's like, everyone will write a definition and then you guess, like, and you try and get people to guess your version kind of thing. But there's this one part of the game where it's called weird laws, and it's throughout history, and there's these like insane laws in certain places where it's like can't walk your duck down Colfax Avenue. It's like, stuff like
Smart.
that. So I going into this episode with you, one of the questions and things I wanted to take a quick dive into is, do you believe the law advances with our increased moral aptitude as we move into the future, and as those social norms kind of improve and maybe get more polished with manners and etiquette? Does that spur the growth in law being more fair and things like that?
I sure like to think so, Sean. But I think that the law is really reactive, and it can take years or decades or longer for the law to react to these evolving social norms, these evolving ideas of civility and respect and fairness. For example, women weren't allowed to vote for a long, long time. That was a tremendously unfair
Yep.
injury to an entire group of people.
Mhm.
Slavery, of course, Jim Crow law, segregation. These things were all law. These were, and so whenever we see a law, I think it's important not to just wholeheartedly subscribe to it and say, oh, this must be right because it's the law. In fact, I think it's more important, especially as Americans, especially in a democracy where we can change the law, to look critically at laws and say, wait a sec, does this still conform with our sense of justice, with our sense of fairness, with our sense of what we should do? And I think that manners are interwoven through that analysis.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct and on point with that. So that's kind of what I was suspecting would be the answer, and but you say it so much more eloquently and wonderful. So thanks for thanks for adding that. Um, so as we're getting close to closing out here, I always, a fun part of this show is I like to talk about, basically part of this show was developed after my fandom for Curb Your Enthusiasm, because I jokingly say I'm Larry David out there, just this awkward mess of a human. So the show is really, about my path and my journey to stop being that awkward human. But I like to get takes from all the individuals on this show, and regardless of what industry you're in. But we've all probably had awkward moments. Can you think of any maybe awkward moments where you were in that situation either early in your career, or not even, doesn't have to be related to the law, but sometime in life where maybe you just didn't know the right thing to do, or you found yourself actually knowing the right thing to do but others didn't, and it put you in this awkward space?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, common one that probably most of the viewers can relate to is I'm not great with names, and so I there was an instance recently. I was at a professional event. I had met this woman, solid attorney. I'd met her probably 3 or 4 times, and I was thinking to myself, God, what is her name? And then I was thinking, do I chance it? Do I guess at what I think it is, or do I just try to be vague or whatever? And I chanced it, and I guessed wrong. and I've known this person for a couple years. We're not close, but in this group of people, I called her something other than her name, and everyone sort of looked at me bro, are you like, that's not her. And I think it was just, we have these scenarios where we're sometimes we want to do the right thing and we think we're trying to, and then it turns out awkward. And so that's something that strikes me a lot as names, and do you try to be a nice guy and act like you know it, or do you instead be a little more vulnerable and say, hey, could you please remind me of your name? I'm sorry. It's whatever. I think that those decisions come up a lot in these interactions.
I think that's great advice, and I don't know what the official rule book says in the etiquette handbook about, about that circumstance, but I struggle with that too. I mean, I have ongoing stories now where it's so easy. I could probably find this. Actually, I should use this time as it's like fresh in my mind to actually look people up. But there are certain people that go through my entire life, and I'm like, it's past the point of awkward, to like I'll bump into like on occasion every couple of months, and every time I'm like, oh my gosh, once again, I don't know your name, and so it's a lot of chiefs and captains coming out of my mouth, and things like that.
Exactly. One little trick that I've started using recently is if I've got somebody with me, like my brother, and there's a third individual whose name I forget, I'll usually be like, and this is my brother Ben. And you are? Or like, I won't say that last part, but it's sort
Oh
of a
yeah,
little trick to
yep.
elicit that reminder from that person. So I try to find little tricks like that sometimes.
Yeah, having a wingman in that scenario, that's my wife. My wife's always, I'll go and be like, hey, can you go kind of introduce yourself, and it's still a little awkward, but less awkward than being like, we've known each other 5 years. But yeah, if you went through my cell phone, you'd see a lot of beard guy, mustache man. It's like guy from the ball game. And then years later, I'm like, who is this? I don't know who that is. And then it's really awkward when I don't know if you've ever been in the social setting where someone's like, like, hey, do I have your phone? Or are you trying to exchange phone numbers? And then you're not quite sure what to put down for their name when we're exchanging. So my
Oh
thing I
God.
do now is I'm like, yeah, shoot me a quick text, and I get a lot of texts, so put your name by it. So
See, that's good. Yeah, I've done something similar in that scenario where where I've been like, okay, the number got it, and how do you spell your name? And they're like, Jason, like Jason. I'm like, oh, yeah, I just want to make
thought
with
that might
Gen
have
Z,
an X
don't
in
know
it.
what they're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah, that's always the worst. It's good if it's like a Jennifer with two N's, but if it's Bob, you're in trouble. So,
Yeah, exactly.
oh man, Eric. Well, Eric, you've really, I mean, as a quick recap of some things, I mean, first and foremost, you brought up a really good point early on in the study of philosophy. Getting our minds to expand with reasoning and logic, and things like that can really be helpful in the realm of the gray area, beyond the law. When we're talking about manners and etiquette, is there's a lot of things that it's not always, I always talk about the fact that sometimes with manners, you can know the right manners, but it's actually not of good etiquette to enforce your manners if it's not commonly accepted, so there's all these kind of things that we can learn through some thought leaders from the past and some of these great philosophers. And you had brought up Marcus Aurelius, and It's a great one. If you all have some time, rather than watch all these law movies and everything like that out there, read some of those books, and and then experience real law from the Mile High Lion, Eric Faddis. But so yeah, but I really like some of the ideas we talked about of, really it. I was going into this thinking more on the citizen side, but it's also on the in the legal realm, having that manners and etiquette involved, and how that actually spurs the outcome, and that sort of thing a lot of times. So, as we wrap up here, I guess my last question to ask you is, if if you were to just take one thing in our day-to-day life, and you kind of answered this earlier, but if there's one thing that maybe you could say, okay, this is the law to do moving forward, what's one thing you would make a law rather than just an etiquette or manner law?
I think a guiding principle is that golden rule. It's treat others how you want to be treated, and I think that that comes up in the law. It certainly comes up outside of the law,
Yep.
and I think that if, as a general rule, if people were to abide by that, they would have better outcomes. I think society as a whole would be better. Manners are sort of the glue by which a civil society remains intact. And if you look at some societies that have crumbled over time, it often gets so acrimonious, so hostile between different classes, different factions, different groups. And so, to the extent that we can have this baseline civility, this baseline respect, I think that is going to carry the day. I think it's best for America and best for the world.
Yes, the Mile High Lion, everyone. You brought it, Eric. Thank you. That's exactly what I was hoping you would bring to this conversation today. Once again, your intellect of the law, but also just your master class in manners and etiquette as well. So thank you so much for being my guest. And as we wrap up here, for anyone out there, once again, Eric is an active and acting personal injury attorney, and he's very good at what he does. So, Eric, you want to tell, if anyone has a need in that realm of the world, you want to tell people how to contact you or get in touch with you?
Oh, sure. So, yeah, if anyone has been injured we do a ton of car crash cases, traumatic brain injury, wrongful death, things like that. They can go to ericfaddislaw.com. That website is still being finalized, but there's also at Eric Faddis Law on Instagram. And hey, if you just have a question, if you just like want to run something by an attorney to the extent that I can answer it and I'm available, I'm happy to do that. So feel free to hit me up.
Amazing. Well, Eric, thank you so much for being my guest on Mannered today. And for all of you listening out there, this show is about manners of all kind, the good, the bad, the awkward moments. And today you've just experienced Eric Faddis, the Mile High Lion, to give us kind of a deep dive in beyond the courtroom and into that realm of how manners and etiquette play a role, not only in the process of law, but in our daily lives. And I'm very appreciative for you, Eric Faddis, for being on this show. And for all of you listening, please take time to remind yourself to interact out there with manners. And as always, mind your manners. And thank you for listening to the Mannered Podcast.